Now, recently, we've been hearing more about people trying to protect their businesses from criminal elements. Following the Pennywise heist and the recent incident in which a woman shot a bandit who attempted to rob her, we wanted to check in with a specialist about how businesses can keep their companies safe and the impact this crime scourge is having on businesses. Joining me to talk more about this is CEO of Air Support Tactical Security and actually a retired army man, Mr. Dirk Barnes. Mr. Barnes, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on Now.
Good morning, Kimberly, and good morning, Trinidad and Tobago.
Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Mr. Barnes, I want to jump right in because one of the most recent examples you would have had about businesses protecting themselves was that Canupia woman who had her licensed firearm and she was able to, stop the assailant when it is he came into her building and wanted to rob her. Is this the solution for businesses who are trying to protect their businesses? Is it as simple as getting that FUL, going to do some training, and then having that to protect yourself?
That's a very complex question, so I will try to break it down to answer. The simplest answer is no. The answer to an increase in gun crimes is not to increase FUL holders and actually carrying a gun. That's not the answer. Now, the FUL and a firearm does give you the ability to defend yourself, but you have to start to look at your external exposure and how you could limit that external exposure to the criminal element. You have to start to look at what deterrence you can create to ensure that you are not a target of criminal elements. You also have to examine what are some of the internal procedures that you use within your organization to move what those criminal elements would want to take from you, move it out of their reach, and put it into the hands or the conveyance of some other competent authority. And I'm talking about money right now, to move your monies or to move your valuables from one point to the other so it is not a risk. And beyond that, if you have to accept any level of risk as to what is acceptable to you to lose, you could look at other means of making sure that you have them covered in an insurance or some kind of backup or redundancy. So there are a number of levels that you have to use within your business to ensure that you have protection of your valued assets. But when it comes to your most valuable asset, the life of you, your workers, your family, the firearm does help. But again, it's in very unique circumstances, because in the firearm community, we say you have to wait your turn. And as we saw in the situation with the Pennywise heist, they didn't really have a turn to wait. They were attacked from the onset. And we are seeing a level of violence in Trinidad and Tobago that is a bit unprecedented. I mean, we don't see these type of attacks happening all over the world. So we are seeing a different level of desperation within the criminal elements.
Right. Now, Mr. Barnes, so just going back to the firearm again, because I want people to understand, is it that the firearm can be used in tandem with other type of support?
And I would say yes, to a point, but the firearm is your last resort.
Right.
You have to do everything as a business owner to remove yourself from the face of the criminal element. Limit your exposure, provide the necessary deterrence, make sure that you have some visible security measures in place, things that will let them move on to the other target and take you out of that limelight. I mean, if we look at the kind of businesses that are currently being hit, we see some of the smaller groceries, restaurants, now a flower shop. They're not going after some of the larger ones. You don't see them walking into Cinemaplex. You don't see them going into large groceries. Well, actually they did, but you don't see that often.
Yes, I understand.
So,
Yeah. So then is it that these smaller businesses are vulnerable to these type of attacks? And then is it that they should hire security guards? Is it that they should ensure that there are working cameras on the compound?
Right. So yes, the smaller groceries are being targeted. We saw it recently in Tunapuna, for example, extortion taking place where you have to pay protection money, and if you don't pay protection money, you will be attacked. We had a father and son combo killed over separate days in the Tunapuna area, and these things are going to continue because, if you think about it from the criminal element, the hierarchy of needs, Maslow hierarchy of needs. what has happened over the past 7 years in Toronto, we're going to identify 7 years, is that a lot of the things that we were accustomed to are being taken away from us. For example, we had a lot of people who lost jobs. Now, as much as those people lost jobs, entering into a lower income bracket in terms of the jobs they are taking up, the people who were there are not getting those jobs now, and they themselves are desperate. So we have criminals we have ordinary citizens who are sometimes law-abiding turning into criminals because they have to eat, they have to live, they have to sleep, they have to get all of those things that we all take for granted. Now, as I have to keep saying that businesses on a whole must look at providing some level of deterrent. Now, you mentioned security guards, and security guards is a type of deterrent, but unfortunately, because in this particular industry, in the private security industry, you have the Ministry of National Security and the Toronto Tobago Police Service who have oversight over the private security industry. We have issues where officers right now cannot be precepted. We have situations, well, right now, you know that there was a whole big firearm audit, and having security guards armed is a very difficult thing to achieve. I mean, that is now sort of open up. But for a close to a year, we couldn't get any new security officers promoted, precepted, or even given a firearm. So all of this backlog now has increased the prices of security guards. And what is interesting, as we saw happen recently, I think somewhere in South, that these security guards who are not being given their ability to go out and apply their trade are being replaced by the same police officers who are moonlighting. And these police officers are the ones who are supposed to be giving the security guards the instruments to be able to apply their trade. So I don't know if this is by design, but it seems a serious conflict of interest on the security industry.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Mr. Barnes, I mean, this is a very important point that you're raising, but I'm also wondering as well, in terms, just going back to the whole security issue, is it that we are saying that trained, well, first of all, security guards should be trained and that they should have that option to have that firearm when they are guarding these businesses and properties?
That's correct. Now, within the private security industry, we have the Supplemental Police Act, and I have to talk about it quickly. The Supplemental Police Act gives security guards all the rights, privileges, and immunities of a police officer up to the rank of corporal. So essentially, when they are providing security services, they are police officers on a location. Now, once you become precepted and you fall under the Supplemental Police Act, you can then carry an FUC. All of these things are governed by the Toronto Tobago Police Service. They're the ones who administrates this process. And in that entire process, the security company or the security provider is required to train their officers. That level of training will, of course, vary from provider to provider, depending on what their niche market or what their capabilities and competencies are. But generally speaking, when you see a precepted officer on a location, he is a trained officer and should not be underestimated. We have seen many videos of these officers responding and responding very well. In some cases, apprehending criminals, taking them before the courts. So these things do work. But there must be a recognition between, or a delineation between a security officer, someone who is just wearing a uniform, and a precepted officer, a person who would have gone through the process in the private security industry. But I'm saying that precepted officers are right now being replaced by police officers who are moonlighting. And again, I have to reiterate, that is a conflict of interest. We do have police officers out there that have a use in the private security industry, but they should not be replaced in security officers. So as I come back now to the business owner, business owners are required to ensure that their locations have trained and qualified and certified personnel to protect their locations. And sometimes it comes down to the price, because there's going to be a difference in the price between a precepted armed officer and a security officer who's wearing a uniform. Big difference. And there's also going to be a big difference in their individual deliverables.
Now, as it relates to protection and safety, are there any tips that you can give to security officers, whether they are precepted or not, when they are guarding these buildings? Because as you rightly said, it seemed as if in the Pennywise heist, these officers didn't stand a chance, because as soon as the vehicle stopped, the gunmen came out and they were attacked. So any tips that you can give to security officers, even businesses listening now, in terms of how they can ensure that they're safe, especially when they're moving something like money?
Okay, so Again, another complex question. To security officers specifically, security officers will have defined rules and they have to understand their rules and should not cross over into another rule. A security officer at a location is in a surveillance mode. He's there as, in some cases, concierge. He's there to provide surveillance. He's there to provide a response. He must know his role. Now, if you have an officer, this is to the business community. If you have an officer that you want to be visible, you also have to have a couple other officers who are not officers who will be able to respond in case that person is overwhelmed. This idea of providing one officer to do everything, every single role, so much so that in some groceries, I've seen officers carrying out groceries for people. That is not the role of the security officer, and you're putting them at risk. You're putting your organization at risk. So the first piece of advice I would give to both entities is to define the role of the security officers and ensure that the security officers on location have that response or have that response element or the reinforcement in case something should happen. The other thing that security officers must understand is that people who are coming to the establishment, they are not the enemy. So you have to, even though you are in a role that you have to profile, you have to make sure that you treat everyone as law-abiding as well. We see many times security officers take a very high and powerful role and they themselves become the combatant. We saw this happen recently with, again, the police officer and the gentleman who passed. That situation could have been dealt completely differently. Now, on to businesses. Businesses at this point in time, please understand that the climate has changed. What we have as a criminal element now is not a criminal element of 20 years ago. So you have to look at changing the way you do business and changing the way you do you manage money. We need to move to a cashless society where people are now using their cards more and less cash. You have less cash to move with. If you do have to move with cash, there's something that we call operational security. This is where you protect the information regarding the movement of your money. It's on a need to know. That money is moved only under the instructions of certain senior people in your organization, and the rest of the movements are not visible to the remainder of your staff element. If you take some of these little pieces of advice and you put them together, you can reduce your risk. I'm not going to say you're going to get rid of all of it, but you would reduce it significantly, that you would have less chances of a criminal element identifying and intercepting, part of your business operation or vulnerabilities in your business operation.
Yeah, and finally, Mr. Barnes, for those of us who are just average citizens and we're trying to ensure that we are safe at all times, any tips for us?
Pray to start with. I mean, and I'm not joking here right now. Prayer is very important, but more importantly, just same thing I will echo to the private citizen that I just said to the business community. The climate has changed. We are in a situation right now that people are desperate, people are hungry, and until we start to see new policies being rolled out by our government, what we have to do as citizens is protect our own. This is a good time to start to look at reinforcing your homes, changing the way you do things, looking at the people that you keep within your circle, and all the visibles that we like to put outside there, and in some cases the bling and the zest and all these different things. Time to cut back on some of those things. Now, I give this to all of my clients in terms of piece of advice. At this point in time, you have to start to look at what do you do in your home. That's the most important thing to protect right now, your family. And things like cameras, visible deterrents like burglar proofing. We do all of these things. But there are some intangibles, and those intangibles is the behaviors that we currently exhibit while we're at home. Make sure and check your doors at night, lock your doors, make sure that you keep your fence line clean, that you don't have high bush and brush growing in your properties that cuts back visibility. If you have to come home late at night, make sure you call ahead and have your loved ones waiting for you. Neighborhood watch programs are very effective in these times. So this is this good time to link with your neighbors, be your brother's keeper. So those are some of the simple things I would suggest at this point in time until we start to see a change in the current criminal climate.
Well, Mr. Barnes, thank you so much for joining us on the Now Morning Show and just sharing exactly how businesses and even the average citizen can ensure their safety. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
And that was CEO of Air Support Tactical Security and a retired major with the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, Mr. Dirk Barnes, just giving us some safety tips as we ensure that we keep our businesses and ourselves